friends. Thank you for joining us today. A warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us on Focus on Africa. To let you know, Focus on Africa was started 5 years ago, and the program was a partnership with the Division of Applied Social Sciences in CAFNAR and Bond Life Sciences Center's Life and Science Society program. We would like today to thank the sponsors today's sponsors, that's the MU Division of Inclusion, Diversity and Equity, and CAFNA International Programs, directed by Dr. Kerry Clark. CIP provides capacity building and development assistance to global partners and facilitates global engagement for students and faculty. Today, we'll have two speakers. Each speaker will be talking for like 20 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. And then at the end of the two talks, we're going to have time for questions. And so please stay tuned for the whole time. And I'm sure we're going to really, really enjoy it. Now, I would like to call on Zeno. Zeno is going to introduce to us, Mazino Dixon is going to introduce to us the first speaker for today.
Thank you, Mary, and welcome to everyone to this month's edition of Focus on Africa. Yes, like she said, we're going to have two speakers, and the first on the bill today is a lady, a very intelligent lady, very articulate. Her name is Anne Obadan. Anne Obadan is a third-year doctoral student in the Harry Truman School of Government and Public Affairs. Now, her research focuses on the effect of policies and programs on immigrants and migrants at different life stages. Anne received a master's degree in public and international affairs from the University of Lagos, Nigeria, my university, and has a bachelor's degree in French language from the prestigious University of Benin, Edo State, also in Nigeria. Her presentation today is titled Examining the Well-Being of Internally Displaced Persons, IDPs, in Nigeria's Northeast, and will highlight the social and psychological challenges of displacement on internally displaced persons in the northeastern region of Nigeria. And it's over to you.
Thank you, Maxino. So thank you all for coming. My name is Anne Obadan, as Maxino has said, and today I'll be presenting a work which is quite different from, not really so different from what I do, but still related. It's a population I'm really passionate about, which is internally displaced persons in Nigeria. I did this work in 2018 as part of my master's thesis, and today I'm really glad to present it to you. So the title of this work is Examining the Well-Being of Internally Displaced Persons in Nigeria Northeast, and the work is going to focus on IDP camps and the social and psychophysiological challenges of IDPs. I want to say a special thank you to TVC News for providing the multimedia materials and also supporting in pursuing this research. So a general overview of what my study is about. So this study examines the social and psychophysiological challenges of 90 internally displaced persons from the Daluri IDP camp in Maiduguri, Borno State, Nigeria, between 2017 and 2018. So what are my findings? The first finding is that IDPs in crowded shelter report more physical and psychological dysfunction than those in less crowded shelters. And also IDPs resident in camp report more dysfunctional social behavior than those that were resident outside the camp. So when we talk about social here, we are talking about human relationship. When we look at psychological challenges, we are talking about mental and mind behavior. When we look at physical, we are talking about the normal body functioning. So a little bit of my motivation for this study. Internally displaced persons are people that are actually forced to flee their native home due to things like armed conflicts, violence, human rights violation, and they reside within their borders. So they flee their native home, but still reside within their country borders. They are quite different from refugees who go to seek refuge in other countries. So refugees actually cross their country borders. We know that in 2019, we had about 45.7 million IDPs worldwide, which is twice the number of refugees. IDPs are also subjected to the same challenges as refugees. So they suffer from loss of livelihood, they threat and assault, they have interrupted education, they are subjected to sexual violence and forced recruitment into armed group. They also suffer from things like malnutrition, food insecurity. Yet, unlike refugees, there's no binding international convention that fully protects IDPs. And also, IDPs are under the protection of their state government. So the government of their country protects IDPs, even though the government of their country is responsible for their displacement. And IDPs also move to areas that are difficult to deliver humanitarian assistance to. Not all live in camp. Collecting data for IDPs is very difficult because these are just like a hidden population. Though we know where they are, but they're all scattered around. So making research about this population difficult and also making this population even more vulnerable. So what do we know about IDPs in Africa? So my right here is the map of the continent of Africa. And we know that Africa bears a large brunt of internal displacement. So you have countries like Ethiopia here. Ethiopia has 1.8 million IDPs. We find Somalia with 2.6 million IDPs. We also find South Sudan. We also find South Sudan with 1.4 million IDPs. We find Sudan with 2.3 million IDPs. Even Nigeria has 2.9 million IDPs. So you can see that Africa as a continent has a significant number of internal displaced persons. However, displacement is not just an African problem. We have other countries around the world suffering from issues with displacement and having a large population of internal displaced persons. For example, Syria. Syria has 6.5 million IDPs. We have Colombia with 5.6 million IDPs. We have Afghanistan with 4 million IDPs. We even have Yemen with 3.7 million IDPs. We cannot say we are addressing the issue of refugees without actually looking at the issue of internally displaced persons. We have to also focus on this population. This population is a really important population. They are also as vulnerable as the refugee population. So now, let's go to internal displacement in Nigeria, which is the focus of my discussion today. We know that Nigeria has a population of 2.10 million as estimated by the World Bank for 2021. And Nigeria as a country has 2.9 million IDPs in 2021, which is a significant increase from the 1.9 million IDPs in 2018. The main cause of displacement in Nigeria is the violence caused by the militant Islamic group Boko Haram in the Northeast since 2014. So to my right here, you see this is the map of Africa. This is the map of Nigeria. And you find to my right here, this is the northeastern part of Nigeria, comprising of states like Yobe, Borno, Bauchi, Gombe, Adamawa, Taraba. And this place has suffered a lot from the activities of Boko Haram. If you notice that this part is actually bordered by countries like Niger, Chad, and Cameroon. So we find that there's a lot of activities of Boko Haram here, causing a lot of internal displacement here. We also know that other causes of internal displacement in Nigeria is the competition between pastoralists and farmers in the central and western region. We also know that flooding is also another cause of displacement. But the main cause of displacement in Nigeria, as it is actually the activities of the Boko Haram in the northeastern part of Nigeria. So I'm going to play a video which we are going to watch. We are going to see what it is like in an internally displaced person camp. How do IDPs live? How do they survive?
Conflict in the northeast region has displaced thousands from their ancestral homes. Many women are the most vulnerable, with many made widows by the guerrilla war embarked on by Boko Haram. This is how a typical IDP camp looks like. The women live in clusters and there is no space for privacy. Those living in IDP camps are vulnerable to diseases, fire outbreaks, rapes, and abuses. Most women are idle, making it more difficult for them to provide food for their families. Yazara Modu is a widow with 9 children. Her husband was killed while trying to escape an attack by suspected members of Boko Haram. She lives in this IDP camp together with her children in this hut. Yazara shares with TVC News how she engages in handiwork in order to meet the needs of her children. She says life has become miserable for me since I came to this camp. You can imagine how we live with my 9 children in this hut. we survive on charity, and sometimes we go to bed on an empty stomach. All I want is for my children to have a meaningful life, but it is not going to be possible due to our situation. I take a visit to one of the IDP camps in Maiduguri on a humid afternoon. My mission to Muna al-Badawi camp is to take a look at how children cope. It is a camp with a population of over 50,000 IDPs, and most of the inhabitants are women and children. The moody streets of the camp are busy with IDPs, mostly children roaming about. After getting permission from their parents, I sit down to talk with some of the children in the camp. I get a clear picture of the misery the children face and their desire for a better life away from the camp where they can be free. He says, I don't like living in this camp. There's no sufficient food for us to eat and we don't go to school. I wish we can go back to Murti. Abubakar Abacha is a 14-year-old orphan and has spent 7 years in the camp with his uncle. He tells TVC News he lost his parents while escaping from an attack by Boko Haram in 2013. He says, I came with my younger brother from Mafa. My father died with bullet wounds while escaping from our village. I still remember how my mom fell on the ground from the truck we came with. I live with my uncle here in the camp, and food is not enough for us. I don't know the way back to our village, but I still want to return.
So that short video clip just shows a typical life in a typical IDP camp. You have a lot of children and you have a lot of parents living in crowded shelters, living in small huts. This relates to my research question. Do IDPs in crowded shelter report significantly higher levels of physical and psychological discomfort than those in less crowded shelters? My second research question is, do IDPs resident in camp report more dysfunctional social behavior and depressive symptoms compared to their counterparts that reside outside the camp? So my study is set in Dalori IDP camp in Borno State, Nigeria, which had over 50,000 IDPs in 2018. The camp was actually opened in 2013. So I purposely sampled Dalori IDP camp because it's one of the biggest IDP camp in Borno State, which is actually the center of the Boko Haram activities. Borno State is actually a very volatile area. Convenience sampling was used to select my study participants, which happened to have a final number of 90 respondents with 48 males and 42 female IDPs surveyed. So a little bit of my instrument. I used two standardized surveys. The first is the stress symptom checklist. So the stress symptom checklist contained two categories. So the first category is 29 items that measure physical symptoms. So when we talk about physical symptoms, the survey asks you, in the last few months, how did you experience things like headache, backache, constipation, cold, insomnia, etc. And also the second category had 23 items, which had questions like, did you experience anxiety, forgetfulness, nightmares, crying spell, apathy, confusion, etc. Then I also used the symptom distress checklist, which was used to assess depressive symptoms and analyze behavioral and social dysfunction among IDPs. So that acts on a scale of 0 to 4, with 0 being not bothered at all and 4 being very bothered. How bothered were you by different categories? So here we have different categories of items. We have things like somatization. Somatization had questions like soreness of the muscle, pain in the heart or chest, trouble breathing. We also had a category for interpersonal sensitivity, which asked questions like, do you feel critical of others? Do you feel inferior to others? Do you feel self-conscious? And so we had all those categories. And the survey was actually administered with the help of research assistant, multilingual research assistant, because some of the surveys had to be transcribe to the respondents' own language. And also, at times we had to read it out in Hausa language to these respondents to be able to answer. So, beginning of my results. So this is a summary statistics of who my respondents are. So we find that 47% of my respondents were females. We find that 67% of them were resident in camp, meaning not all IDPs stay in camp. So we had some IDPs who just use the camp resources during the day, but they sleep outside the camp. So those are the non-resident IDPs. They do not sleep in the camp. We also had the modal age for everybody in my survey as 25 to 34 year, within the 25 to 34 year category. The modal religion is Islam, and most of my respondents had spent 3 years and above in the camp. Most of my respondents had 3 to 5 beds in their living space in the camp. And 85% recorded that they felt crowded. So I picked a subjective measure of crowding rather than an objective measure of crowding because of the situation in the camp. This is a crisis period. An objective measure of crowding is going to ask questions like, how many people are in a particular space? But here, I used a subjective measure of crowding, which asks respondent, do you feel crowded? So over to my first result. My first research question was actually trying to record the difference between the physical distress and psychological distress of IDPs when we are comparing crowded and less crowded IDPs. So I must state that this is in no way causal. I'm not doing a causal analysis. This is purely a descriptive work. This is just a simple comparison of mean between those that reported that they are crowded and those that reported that they are less crowded. So here from this table, you see that IDPs who report feeling crowded experience on average more physical distress and more psychological distress than those who reported being less crowded. So here we have a mean of 7.76, which we are comparing to a mean of 1.01. And we find that the difference is actually statistically significant at the 0.05 significance level. So that means there's actually a difference in what they reported. Similarly, we have in the psychological distress section, we see the same thing. That means those who reported crowded are actually experiencing or reporting more of these physical and psychological distress symptoms. Over to my second result. So here we look at dysfunctional social behavior and depressive symptoms by camp residency status. That means as an IDP, are you resident in the camp or are you non-resident in the camp? So here again, we can see different categories like somatization, we can see obsessive compulsive behaviors, we can see interpersonal sensitivity. These all had questions. So some of these categories will have 8 questions, some will have 7 questions. So what I do here is I'm actually taking those, your rating. So you are able to rate based on whether you are bothered or not bothered. So you have on a scale to 0 to 4. And what I did here is actually treating this as a continuous variable, as an interval level variable, and actually just taking the mean and comparing the two groups. Again, this is not a causal study. This is just a simple comparison of mean. So here we find that there's actually significant difference between those that are resident in camp and those that are non-resident in camp. We find that in all the categories, IDPs who are resident in camp report more dysfunctional social behavior and depressive symptoms than those who do not reside in the camp. So going to the policy implication of my study. First of all, I must state that I really want to appreciate the effort of the UNHCR and other humanitarian organizations like the Red Cross. Various NGOs are actually working with this population. It's not really easy to work with this population given how volatile it is in the northeastern part of Nigeria. And also, given that the insecurity situation hasn't changed that much, it is really difficult to work with this situation, but I really want to appreciate the effort. But I must say that there's really a lot more to do. While we think that IDP camps is supposed to be a temporary camp, of course, it's supposed to be a temporary camp, but yet we see that there are people that have spent 7 years in the camp. Therefore, the government must actually put in a lot of effort in planning IDP camp, knowing that the security situation is not looking like it's going to reduce anytime soon. Therefore, we have to think about how do we plan this IDP camp? What is the carrying capacity of the camp? How are the housing shelters being built? Also, the government needs to create a long-term framework for resettlement of IDPs. We cannot continue sustaining this IDP camp. It is becoming even more difficult to run an IDP camp. Let us have a framework. Let us have a policy for reintegration of IDPs. Looking at these children, they have no form of education. The only form of education they receive in the IDP camp is the Ahmadiyya education, which is just Muslim clerics teaching them the Quran. So we need to move beyond that. We need to find a way to reintegrate this population back into society and give them a means of livelihood. The government has done a lot. The government has created different ministries. You have the Northeast Development Commission. You have the Presidential Initiative on Northeast. You have the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, among others. But we need a long-term framework. We need to say, this is the plan. This is the amount of years we want to reintegrate these IDPs back into society. And also Africa as a whole needs to revisit the Kampala Convention. So in 2009, Africa decided to adopt the 1998 UN Guiding Principles of Internal Displacement as a binding convention for 24 member states of the African Union that actually ratified the Kampala Convention. But we need to go back to the drawing board. We've had this convention since 2009, which came into force in 2012. The Conference of State Parties was supposed to be in charge of the monitoring and evaluation of the convention, the implementation of the convention, but they met last in 2017. What has been done since then? Where do we need to go from here? Is this working for Africa as a continent? What can we do to improve the life of IDPs? What can we do to actually jointly create policies, establish framework for protection of internally displaced persons in Africa and in Nigeria? And also, I think the international community needs to move beyond just the 1998 UN Guiding Principles for internal displacement. We need to try to establish an international binding convention, just as we have for refugees. This is going to go a long way to handle this issue. Internal displacement, we cannot say we are dealing with the issue of refugees without actually focus on internal displacement. This population is also as vulnerable as refugees, and we really need to go back to the drawing board. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that was a fantastic presentation by Anne Obadan. Of course, Anne is a doctoral student at the Harry Truman School of Government and Public Affairs. She gave statistics. She really did the back with video footage, and she also preferred solutions. And now we have an idea of what is actually happening in Northeast Nigeria. And she's not going to be the only speaker. We'll have another fantastic speaker, but I will not do the presentation. Mary will take it from here. Mary, over to you.
Thank you. So yes, I'm supposed to introduce the second speaker, but before I go on to do that, I would like to thank our interpreter for today. Thank you, Sandy Dumont for being here with us. All right, so now to our second speaker. Tuka Bekee is a doctoral student in the environmental and development economics emphasis area of the Division of Applied Sciences at the University of Missouri. He is also pursuing a minor in international development. He obtained his master's degree in economics from University of Missouri, St. Louis, and prior to that, was involved in designing and implementing projects related to agricultural development and youth empowerment in sub-Saharan Africa. Africa has a large agricultural potential that remains largely untapped. In addition, with about 70% of its population below the age of 30, the continent is saddled with the burden of productively engaging its young people. As a result, governments and development partners have responded by promoting several youth in agribusiness initiatives in a bid to gainfully employ the youth and transform the agricultural sector. Taking the case of one of these initiatives, this presentation explores various factors that are critical to the success of such development interventions. Its presentation is titled, Engaging the Youth in the Agricultural Transformation of Africa. Please, let's give Tuka Bekee a warm welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, Mary, for that warm introduction. And thank you, Anne, for a very informative presentation. So good afternoon, everyone. My presentation today is not necessarily a scientific research per se. It's more related to work I was involved in prior to graduate studies. Trying to share my screen, so please bear with me. Okay. Yes. So I've titled it Engaging the Youth in the Agricultural Transformation of Africa, Lessons from a Youth in Agribusiness Initiative. The outline, I would begin by giving a background, then focus on the case that I want to talk about, try and draw out lessons or factors which I believe contribute to the success of youth in agribusiness initiatives, and then wrap it up with my conclusion. So just a brief snapshot of the state of agriculture in Africa. Most of the farm land is being farmed by smallholders, and much of the land is unirrigated. As a matter of fact, just over 5% of farmed land in Africa is irrigated compared to over 40% in Asia. Then a World Bank report in 2013 pointed out that the rate of growth in agricultural productivity over the past 4 decades was just about 2.4% in sub-Saharan Africa compared to 4% in the rest of the developing world. Africa also suffers from wide gap in agricultural yields. FAO report suggests that the yields in Africa are about 42% of the world average. Africa is also home to like the largest reserve of uncultivated arable land. So these all point to the great agricultural potential of the continent, which unfortunately is still largely untapped. Then moving on to the state of things with respect to the young people in Africa. We know Africa is still a young continent with over 20% of the global youth population, which is projected to rise to about 40% in the next decade. So 3/4 of the population in sub-Saharan Africa is under 35 years old. But sadly, a large proportion of this population is not formally employed. This youth bulge has been referred to as a ticking time bomb. And unfortunately, we've seen this bomb explode, as it were, in some countries already. So it's evident that the cost of inaction with respect to youth employment is much greater than the cost of action. So given this backdrop of the state of affairs with both the agricultural sector and youth employment, several efforts have been geared towards capturing the demographic dividend on the continent. There have been several interventions trying to harness the innovativeness of youth and channel it towards the agricultural sector. So in this presentation, I'll be focusing on just one of those initiatives. There are several actually on the continent. And that is the ITA Youth in Agribusiness Initiative. So ITA is the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, which is one of the research centers under the CIGIA group. These are institutions, international institutions that do research around food security. So this initiative, IYA for short, was one of the winners of the International Innovation Award for Sustainable Food and Agriculture in 2019 by the FAO, which is the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. So now I'll briefly describe the model and attempt to point out reasons which I believe contributed to its success. So I was a part of this program at its inception in 2012. So like I said, it all began in 2012 after a visit by the then president of the International Fund for Agricultural Development to ITA. He called for greater institutional support for the youth in agriculture. So ITA responded by getting young people who were in the institute, try to form this group. So we had people from various academic backgrounds, the sciences, social sciences, humanities. There were people with no exposure to agricultural production. So the goal was then, the initiative commenced by conducting workshops and seminars to try to orient the youth towards agriculture. There were several tours to agribusinesses within and outside the region. The Institute also provided training in activities along different agricultural value chains, especially those that fell under the mandate crops of the Institute. And then there were mentoring relationships formed with scientists and technicians within the Institute to help guide the activities. The group kickstarted its operation. We ventured into the production of seeds for soybeans, maize, plantain suckers. This was just trying to help fill the gap. There was a huge shortage of improved planting materials at the time. That's high quality or high yielding varieties in these various commodities. So venturing into these enterprises helped fill that gap. We also went into production of crops, had cassava, and over time expanded into vegetable production, fisheries, piggery, poultry, and several other enterprises. There were also post-harvest processing activities, production of soy milk, other products from high-quality cassava flour and soybean flour. The group also ventured into offering training workshops to other groups as well. And while all this was going on, another arm was really involved in trying to establish partnerships with various stakeholders. This was a priority in trying to expand the impact of the initiative. So collaborations were formed with players in the private sector, in the government, both at the local, state, and federal level, with youth organizations to help promote knowledge exchanges as well as the sharing of learning experiences, collaborations with development partners, and so on. Eventually, this led to the establishment of various root groups within the country as well as outside of the country, like in countries like Congo, Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya, and several of these replication efforts happened through various means. Some were through projects that were funded by donors, others were through working with the government, but yet some were formed through working with the private sector. So, for example, one of the major oil companies in Nigeria at the time decided to change its approach to towards its corporate social responsibility. In the past, it had provided physical infrastructure in the communities where it worked, but it then decided to empower the youth because the youth restiveness was becoming much of a problem in that region. So we worked with this oil company to establish youth in agriculture groups as well. On a different note, there were also efforts to try to, gather the various work being done by several organizations for a more comprehensive approach in mobilizing governments and other stakeholders towards supporting youth involvement in agribusiness. So working with other partners like the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, with the African Development Bank, a program was developed. It's called the Enable Youth Program, which is an acronym for Empowering Novel Agribusiness-Led Employment for Youth in Agriculture. And this program is currently operational in several African countries. So now I'll transition to highlighting some of the lessons that were from experience, as well as factors which I think, in my opinion, contributed to the success of some of these. I'll start from the individual level. So there had to be a change in the mindset of youth at the time, and I think probably this problem exists till now. Agriculture had there was a negative perception of agriculture by many people, especially the young people. It was viewed as a sector with low earning potentials, where you had to do lots of tedious work. So as a result, people never aspired to careers in agriculture. And this was definitely a problem, considering the average age of farmers in sub-Saharan Africa was really high. Some reports say about 60 years old. So you had to change the mindset of youth, and this was achieved through various means. So for IYA, it happened through highlighting the success stories of other agricultural entrepreneurs, taking them on tours to successful agribusinesses, also just enlightening people on the various entry points into the agricultural value chain. I was beyond just primary production. We also had things like packaging, marketing, and the rest. On another note, there were wider efforts being done to rebrand agriculture. So, for example, in Nigeria, the Minister of Agriculture at the time, Dr. Adeshino, he would also dress up, in fine suits and a bow tie. And he said the purpose of this was to present agriculture, as a cool sector to attract young people. There was also the campaign by One Campaign, which is a non-profit in the US, but does a lot of work in Africa. They brought together about 19 African musicians to create this song. I'm going to play a clip shortly. So this was done in 10 languages. People from 11 countries, 10 different languages. And the whole idea was just to, get youth to go into agriculture, and it pays. So I'll just play a short clip from the song.
We stand together. As one. I wanna be so. I wanna be so. Coconut chocolate. Not chocolate. Coconut chocolate. Not chocolate. Hey,
Okay, yeah, so those are some of the things that were being done to, change the image and perception of agriculture. And some of those artists were even involved in agriculture themselves. At least I know for the band, he had his cocoa gari production and some other stuff going on. Another factor which I think is very key was is the role of champions. It just can't be underestimated. So, for example, for the IYA, they had the Director General, Dr. Interian Sanginga, as well as Dr. Adeshino. These helped with high-level advocacy, for policymakers, donors, investors. Also, the importance of appropriate institutional support, very key, especially when you have situations with weak agricultural extension systems. You need some of these agricultural institutions to help with providing technical backstopping, even linkages with latest agricultural technologies and new information, and also continuous mentorship. So structures have to be set in place to ensure these mentoring relationships are sustained. Another key factor is political will, firm intention and commitments of the government to carry through with a policy. I remember situations whereby we'd have government officials show a lot of enthusiasm about these projects, especially around election periods. Then after that, they just went missing in action. And the support from the government is very key, because these groups, they don't exist in silos. It's critical to have the right regulatory framework and policies that incentivize the formation, sustenance, and growth of some of these startups, policies that help promote business confidence. Another issue which has to do with the programs themselves is the manner in which they approach capacity development. There were youth and agribusiness programs that just focused on providing only technical skills without incorporating soft skills, skills in communication, leadership, networking, marketing, or financial management. These are all crucial for the success of these would-be entrepreneurs. They also need help with developing business plans. So a holistic approach to capacity development is key for the success of these initiatives. Then complementary investments in supportive networks. So improving access to land, financial resources. There was a paper by Yami et al. That showed that provision of financial support was key in determining the success of youth empowerment schemes. But some of these don't only have to be provided by the government. Even while designing some of these projects, it'll be good to, make provisions for establishing linkages with other stakeholders, with facilitating access to input and output markets, and others. So in conclusion, I would say the success of youth in agribusiness initiatives is influenced by factors inherent in the initiatives themselves, things that could be taken into consideration while designing some of these schemes, like the type of skills that are going to be given, the need for mentoring, relationships, establishing connections with other farmers, with markets and agribusinesses. But however, some other determinants of success lie outside the initiatives themselves. Some are at the macro level, conditions that help create an enabling environment for the success of these initiatives. So that would be all from my end. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tuka, for that presentation. And so I like that today we have both presenters are talking about things to, get us a better world. It's time for questions. Now it's time we would like to have your questions. Please could you type in the chat box, and then we'll read out your questions and give it to our panelists. They would answer for us. Thank you, Anne and Tuka, for doing a great job. Thank you for taking your time on the research. So now to your questions. So we have Blessing here saying, great presentation, Anne and Tuka. Okay, thank you, Blessing. Do you have any questions for them? We are waiting on your questions. Okay, so before questions come, and Tuka, I see that where you played the music and you were talking about the Minister of Agriculture dressing in a certain way. Are you saying that? So would you say that that actually was very effective in getting the youth into agriculture? Or because I don't understand, would it just be that is it just the appearance of would it be the appearance of these agriculturists that makes people not want to be it, or is it that you don't have enough like capital from it, or profits rather? Do you get profit from agriculture in Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'd say trying to attack these issues, it wouldn't be good to just go through piecemeal. So you can't just focus on trying to change the image without making substantial changes to the entrepreneurial environment there. So as that was being done, as policies were being implemented, also had to address the issue of changing the perceptions. Social science research has shown that perceptions actually affect people's behavior. So in this context, people's willingness to venture into agriculture was being hindered by the perception that there were no real earnings. Who wants to go into a job where they can't make profits? So just doing little things like that, it makes people more interested, and maybe they could even go do their research. So you can't just approach it from one angle. It has to be a comprehensive approach to addressing this.
So you mean, there's definitely some profits in agriculture in Nigeria?
Are you asking for my opinion?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I did some agriculture as well. So yeah, there is.
Kerry Clark says incredible presentations. And so I hear Joanna has a question. She's raising her hand.
No, I didn't mean to raise my hand. I just wanted to say congratulations, and I learned a lot today. I especially drew some similarities after the earthquake in Haiti with Anne's presentation about people being displaced, and particularly the violence against women that was occurring in the camp. So it was just really interesting to do some cross-cultural observations.
Thank you, Joanna. So Anne, I was in 2018. I was in Northeast Nigeria, where we have most of the internally displaced persons. And well, I saw how the people lived and everything. Question though is, why did you take interest in looking at their mental? Because well, definitely I was even thinking, why did you look at their mental, did you take interest in their mental health? Because I would think, why didn't you take more interest, or not more interest? What just made you think about their mental health? Because I feel for me, I would rather even do more research on just like their well-being, how to get in place. What made a mental health issue striking to you?
So I think one thing, I had a big picture of looking at the whole well-being of IDPs, right? But mental health is always key. Mental health, as you can see, my focus is not just mental health. Mental health is one thing. I looked at physical, I looked at social interaction. So for me, it was all about their well-being. I couldn't do things like just education, because I was having a discussion recently with someone, and we were talking about the fact that for now, it's just even about getting to feed these people. It's just even about getting them help. We haven't even started talking about things like employment. We haven't started talking about things like education. There's still a lot more to be done in terms of research. We rarely have any research about these people. We rarely have data. We can't even get so much data. There's just a lot of limitation trying to get to this group. So for me, I was just trying to focus on the well-being. How do they interact? How has everything been together? That's why I'm saying this is a descriptive study. This is not a causal study. So this is just, what do we see on ground? How is it in the IDP camp? This is how these people are living in the IDP camp. What do we see on ground? What are the things we can draw from what we see on ground?
Okay, so Blessing is also asking a question. She's saying, what is the limitation of your research, and what would you do differently if you were to do the same research?
Okay, so what is the limitation of my research? First of all, it's data, like trying to get to this population. As I said, I conveniently sampled these people. Just before I did the sampling, the camp got attacked, and I think there was a bomb in the camp just before I did the study. So even trying to get this population, it's a lot of challenge. And I think one thing I would do differently is try to get more sample, trying to get more respondents to actually do this research, and also try to get at causal analysis. But causal analysis, it's really difficult given data and given that we don't have any form of long-term data for this population. And also trying to do more program analysis. So trying to work with NGOs who are trying to organize these smaller programs, like, is there an NGO trying to do any education program for these IDPs? What are your outcomes? What can we see? How is it being improved? So I'll try to do those kind of things going forward.
So more questions for you, Anne. Yes, and talking about education, Kerry Clark just said, why are there no schools in the camps?
So it still goes back to the same thing. Like, we haven't even dealt with the issue of food insecurity, which is one of the biggest problems right now in the camp. Like, the government is still dealing with insecurity. There's still a lot of attacks going on. So I think that creates a big problem, that we can't even start looking at education for these children. The only form of education we have to rely on is these humanitarian groups that come to the camp and try to teach these children. These children mainly just have the Ahmadiyya education, which I pointed out in my presentation, which is just Muslim clerics trying to teach these children how to read the Quran. And so that is the only form of education for now. It's really, really difficult. Like, you cannot really have schools in the camp because the camp is already stressed out. There's not enough funds for them. They struggle to even feed. So we have all these problems. And that's what I'm saying, like, if we have a longer term framework, reintegration and resettlement is the solution to this. Let us start finding a way to move these people out of the camp. Let us start finding a way to reintegrate them back into the society, start creating schools, start trying to ensure that these children start having something close to their normal lives back. I think that will really help long term.
Okay. Yes, there's more. We have more questions for you still, Anne. And it says, since the IDPs is a marginalized community with very low resources, what are ways to effectively collect data? And she said the question has been answered. Oh, just saying that. Okay, I think you answered that when you were answering Blessing Okafor's question. So
I would just add to that. I think it's getting data for this group. It's not just easy to go in to get data. Like, before you can even have access to this population in the IDPs, it's just a lot of clearance you need to go through. Like you have to go through the army commander who is the head of the camp. I think I was able to get this little data because I was working in a media organization at that time. So I had access to, should I say, I had access to media coverage, and I could use the resources I had at this point to reach these people. So it's really difficult to get to this population. And given that it's Borno State, like it's really difficult getting data.
All right, thank you. So one more question for you, Tuka. My question will be similar to something Anne has answered before. So what would you say are the limitations of your research, and also being that the actors in the agricultural sector in Nigeria are different now? So what would you do differently if you were to if you were to do this research now?
First of all, I don't think my presentation qualifies as a scientific research. It was just me sharing my perspective with some of this. But like I said, much of what I pointed out were just from a particular one initiative. There are several initiatives out there which differ with respect to how they recruit, their goals, even the nature of these interventions. So it'll be good to consider multiple other types of initiatives to draw out more lessons. Yeah, so this was a very, very limited, I wouldn't even call it a study, yeah.
Mazino Dixon has a question.
Yes, I won't waste time. Tuka, you talked about the attempt to get youths interested in agriculture right from time. But we now have a little challenge, the security dimension. And it has to do with the movement of animal herders from different parts of Africa to the agricultural belt of Nigeria. And that has led to several conflicts. Now, the question is, how do you see the impact of the increasing attacks on farming communities by herders and the impact it would have on youth enthusiasm in embracing agriculture fully, especially the commercial aspect?
Thank you very much for that observation. So it definitely has a negative impact. I don't think there's anyone who would love to see their investments just go down the drain. So this ties into, I think, what I try to capture on that political will. So I think if the government, so you can't rule out the government out of these this youth groups or these initiatives. They exist within an ecosystem, and if security, I think if you look through even other countries, when you have the issue of fragile states with high insecurity, nothing can happen when there is insecurity. There is no economic growth or development that can be carried out. So if such issues are not addressed, and I think things like this are just secondary, security is very key.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So we have more questions, but before we go on with the questions, just in case some people have to leave for other engagements, I'd like to remind you that our next focus on Africa will be on September 1, Wednesday, September the 1st, 2021, from 12 p.m. to 1, as always. So there's a question here from Blessing Okafo for Tuka, and she says, you mentioned that some music celebrities came together to produce music with the aim of making the youth see agriculture as something worth venturing into. So do you think that this strategy was helpful, and what other strategy would you think can be used to engage these youths?
In my opinion, I think that strategy, well, I think it would be difficult to try to isolate the impact of just this particular song or things. But I think several things are happening at the time. I try people interested in agriculture, but I don't think people will be interested in pursuing such career path if it is not profitable, especially when you're dealing with the agripreneurs, people who are supposed to establish agricultural enterprises. So if it isn't profitable, I think that's still the primary motive for going into business. So the government still has to play its role in ensuring that, through the right regulations and policies in ensuring that these, and the funny thing is that there's a huge market, because Africa is still, import dependent on several things it could be producing. So there's a huge market for these commodities, and also various other ways in which young people could be engaged in the sector. So I think there's a lot that still has to be done, and it boils down to making sure these enterprises are profitable. If they are, I don't think you would even need any other efforts. The youth go into anything that they can, even unfortunately illegal things, as long as they see there are opportunities to earn income. So if these things are profitable, I would say very easily it will be very attractive to young people.
Thank you. So, Anne, more questions dropping in for you now. It says, Caris is asking, is the international community working on this as well, or collaborating with countries with large IDP populations? So she's referring to organizations like the UN, the WHO, and so
yes, the United Nations actually has an arm, which is the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And also they deal with, apart from dealing with refugees, because as I said, we have a lot of refugees in those border countries like Cameroon, Chad, Niger. They also deal with IDPs. Like if you look at the housing, you see that some of those housing had UNHCR on them. Those were materials provided by the international community. To tell you the truth, a country cannot do this alone. Like that is a huge population, 2.9 million just for Nigeria, and you have the same situation in other African countries. So we have a lot of international community support. Recently, we know that the UN even earmarked about $320 million for internal displacement, but there's just still a lot to be done. Like we need a framework. Like we have to have a policy framework to be able to address this.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you so much. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Barry Tuka, for your presentations today. We are very honored to have you here, and thank you for your good work. Like I said earlier, Focus on Africa will return next to you Wednesday, September the 1st, 2021, from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. I would also like to let you know that the African Film Series, we have an upcoming film screening of the Mediterranean. And so mark your calendars for Wednesday, April 21 at 6 p.m. Look out on our social media to register for the Zoom screening. Thank you for your support today. I would like to thank our sponsors, the IDE, CIP, AGPSA, and other participants and collaborators, volunteers, as well as our advisory board members for their support. Thank you for coming, and see you in September.